The greatest warriors across the universe fell silent as they watched the Terrans. The first shot missed by 4 centimeters. Commander Ethan Cole did not flinch. He was already rolling sideways behind the collapsed beam, pulling Private First Class Lena Marsh by the collar of her suit before the second plasma burst turned the ground where she had been standing into a smoking, blackened crater. 3 Vreth soldiers cleared the ridge at a full sprint, their 6-limbed bodies moving in that terrifying fluid way that had made every other species in the known galaxy surrender on sight. Ethan did not surrender. He came up from behind the beam firing in controlled, deliberate bursts, 2 rounds center mass on the first Vreth. 1 round through the joint of the second one's upper left limb, dropping it sideways. The third one was still moving when Lena hit it from the right flank with a contact charge that sent it skidding 20 meters across the broken concrete of what used to be forward base Keller. 2 down, 1 secured, Ethan said into the comm. From somewhere inside the burning structure to his left, Corporal Ray Dunning answered. I count 11 more on the east wall, sir. They are not stopping. They never stop, Ethan said. He reloaded without looking at his hands. That is why we do not stop either. Forward Base Keller had been a monitoring outpost on the edge of the Valos system, staffed by 47 humans and 1 Quellan liaison officer named Vec, who was currently pressed flat against the floor of the command bunker approximately 30 meters underground, and doing his absolute best not to breathe too loudly. The Vreth had hit the base 11 minutes ago with a force of nearly 200 soldiers, supported by 2 light cruisers in low orbit. Every calculation that Vec had run in his 3 decades of service told him that the humans in this base had a survival probability of roughly 6%. He had shared this calculation with Ethan 20 seconds before the first explosion. Ethan had looked at the number, nodded once and said, "Good, then they are not expecting us to win." Vec had not known what to do with that. He knew what to do with terror. He knew what to do with grief, with tactical retreat, with surrender protocols. He had studied 11 different warrior cultures across the galaxy. The Vreth were the most feared of all of them, and with good reason. They did not negotiate. They did not take prisoners except for study. They did not recognize defeat in others as something worthy of mercy. When the Vreth came, civilizations remembered it for generations, if they survived to remember at all. But Vec had never studied humans up close before this posting. And watching them now through the feed from the base cameras, he was beginning to understand that every briefing he had ever read about the Terrans had been politely, carefully, and catastrophically wrong. Outside, Ethan moved through the smoke like he belonged in it. He was not a large man by human standards. He was not the strongest soldier in the base, not the fastest, and not the one with the most combat hours. That title belonged to Staff Sergeant Dara Keats, who was currently on the roof of the Eastern Storage Unit with a long-range disruptor, calling her shots in a low, almost bored voice, walking her fire down a line of Vreth who had not yet figured out where she was. 7, she said softly. A pause. 8. Ethan heard her and allowed himself a brief, grim smile. He pushed into the courtyard. The Vreth soldier waiting for him was enormous, 2.5 meters tall, covered in the natural bone plate armor that made them so difficult to put down, 4 of its 6 limbs carrying weapons, and 2 bracing for the lunge it was already beginning. It shrieked its battle cry, the sound that had broken the nerve of 3 different species on first contact, the sound that was scientifically documented to trigger a flight response in nearly every known form of sentient life. Ethan stepped into the lunge instead of away from it. He took the creature's upper arm with both hands, used its own momentum to redirect it downward, planted his knee in the joint between its second and third body segment, and put it on the ground in less than 2 seconds. Then he was already moving to the next threat, leaving the secured Vreth for the 2 privates coming up behind him. In the bunker, Vec watched the camera feed with his jaw slightly open. He had never seen a Vreth taken to the ground by anything smaller than a Gorath heavy infantry unit. He pulled up the galactic database. He searched for any documented case of a species successfully engaging the Vreth in close-quarters combat without powered armor or energy shielding. The database returned 0 results. He looked back at the camera. Ethan was already engaging another one. The 11-minute mark became 20. The 20-minute mark became 40. Somewhere in the middle of that time, Vec stopped running survival probability calculations because the inputs kept changing in ways his model did not account for. Humans who should have retreated did not retreat. Humans who should have been suppressed by superior fire kept finding angles. A private named Cole Hartley, who could not have weighed more than 70 kilograms, had somehow acquired a Vreth heavy weapon and was using it against its previous owners with a focused, determined expression that Vec found genuinely difficult to categorize emotionally. Was that joy, frustration, pure concentrated will? He did not know. He was not sure the humans knew either. He was not sure it mattered to them. At the 43-minute mark, the Vreth commander, a field rank officer Vec recognized from intelligence files as a decorated veteran of 9 campaigns, pulled his remaining soldiers back to the perimeter wall. The Vreth had never pulled back from anything. Vec stared at the feed. Ethan's voice came through the bunker speakers, calm and even. "Vec, you can come up now. Bring the medical kit from Locker 7. We have people who need it." Vec stood. His legs were unsteady. He picked up the medical kit. He walked up the stairs toward a surface that, by every measurement he knew how to take, should not have still been held by the humans who had been defending it. When he came out into the smoke and the broken light of the Valo's sun, he saw Ethan standing at the edge of the courtyard, looking at the retreating Vreth with the same calm expression he had worn before the whole thing started. Vec walked up beside him. He did not know what to say. Ethan glanced at him. 6%, he said. "Yes," Vec admitted. Ethan nodded slowly. "We will have to work on your math." The Vreth commander's name was Krath. He had 42 years of combat service and 9 campaign medals, and a scar that ran from his upper left shoulder plate to the center of his back, given to him by a Goreth berserker during the fall of the Draylen Passage. He was not a being who frightened easily, and he was honest enough with himself to admit that what he was feeling right now, as he stood at the perimeter wall staring back at the base that should have been ash by now, was something very close to fear. Not of losing. He had lost engagements before. Every commander who served long enough did. He was afraid because he did not understand what he had just seen, and Krath had learned over 4 decades of war that the things you do not understand are the things that kill you. He opened a channel to the cruiser in orbit. "Get me everything in the database on Terran ground forces. Everything. History, biology, psychological profiles, tactical analysis. Everything." His second-in-command, a younger officer named Vrethsak, gave him a careful look. "Commander, we outnumbered them 4-1. "I am aware of the count," Krath said. "They should not have been able to hold." "I am also aware of that." Krath watched the smoke rising from the base. One of the Terrans had appeared on the outer wall, small against the sky, checking something on a handheld scanner without any apparent concern about being visible. "Do you know what I saw, Vrethsak? I saw them absorb fire that would have broken a Quellan unit in the first 10 minutes. I saw one of them go hand-to-hand with Sergeant Griath. Griath has 12 confirmed close combat kills of beings larger than himself." Vrethsak said nothing. "The Terran won," Krath said. "Not with a weapon, with his hands and his body weight." He turned away from the wall. "We are going back to the ship. We are going to read everything the Coalition has ever collected on this species, and then we are going to figure out what exactly we walked into today." The channel to the cruiser crackled. The data packet began to arrive. Krath opened the first file. The heading read, "Terran Species Overview compiled by the Interstellar Coalition Science Division, 3rd Revision." He began to read. By the 4th page, he had stopped moving entirely. The file was dense with biology, with evolutionary history, with the particular cruelty of the planet that had shaped this species over hundreds of thousands of years. A world of large predators, a world of environmental extremes, a world where the dominant species had no natural armor, no venom, no claws, no enhanced senses, nothing that any reasonable evolutionary biologist would look at and say, yes, this animal will become a civilization. And yet they had, not by being powerful but by being relentless, not by being built for combat but by never stopping when combat found them. There was a documented concept in Terran psychology called persistence hunting. Krath read about it twice. In the ancient history of this species, before technology, the Terrans had survived by following prey over vast distances at a pace that no prey animal could maintain indefinitely. They did not run faster than what they hunted. They simply did not stop. They followed until the prey collapsed from exhaustion, and then they closed the distance. Krath sat back. He had spent 42 years fighting species that were physically superior to the Terrans in almost every measurable way. Species with more limbs, more strength, more natural resilience. And he had beaten most of them because the Vreth were better organized, better equipped, and more willing to accept casualties than their enemies. But this species did not seem to have a concept of acceptable casualties in the same way that other species did. They did not calculate the point at which holding a position became irrational. They held positions that should not have been holdable, and they did it not because of some special physical gift, but because somewhere in the deep structure of what they were, something had decided that stopping was simply not a meaningful option. He found a Terran historical quote in the file, recorded from a military leader named Patton, approximately 300 years before first contact. It said, "No poor bastard ever won a war by dying for his country. He won it by making the other poor bastard die for his country." Krath read it again. Then he did something he had not done in 11 years of commanding a Vreth strike force. He contacted the fleet admiral and requested a strategic review before continuing the Valos campaign. The admiral's response was immediate and irritated. "We are the Vreth. We do not pause for review. We complete the mission." Krath thought about the Terran on the wall with the scanner, unhurried, unafraid, already preparing for whatever came next. "Admiral," he said carefully, "I strongly recommend we look at what we are dealing with before we send more units in. We lost 31 soldiers today to a force of 47. If we continue without adjusting our approach, I believe our losses will continue to be disproportionate." A long silence. "What are they?" the admiral asked finally. Krath looked at the file. "They call themselves humans," he said. "They are from a single planet. They have been space-capable for less than 2 centuries. Another silence. "And they held against your unit." "They did more than hold," Krath said. "They made us pull back. I do not say that to embarrass myself. I say it because I think you need to hear it before we decide on next steps." In the base below, Ethan Cole was sitting on an overturned crate, drinking something hot from a sealed container, reviewing the defensive maps for the next 4 hours with Dara Keats and Ray Dunning. None of them looked like people who had just survived something that should not have been survivable. They looked like people planning what came next, which was exactly what they were doing. Corporal Cole Hartley had fallen asleep against the wall with his rifle across his knees. Lena Marsh was rerouting the base's power grid to repair the perimeter sensors. Vex stood among them and took notes, not because anyone asked him to. He took notes because he was a scientist before he was a diplomat, and what he was witnessing was, he was increasingly certain, something that every major civilization in the galaxy was going to need to understand. He titled his notes, "Preliminary Observations on Terran Stress Response Under Combat Conditions." Then he crossed that out. He wrote instead, "Why the Vreth pulled back." He thought about that for a moment. Then he started writing. There are 9 sitting members on the Interstellar Coalition High Council. representing the 9 oldest spacefaring civilizations in the known galaxy. They meet in a chamber on the station designated Nexus 1, which orbits a quiet star in neutral space and has served as the administrative center of the coalition for 230 years. The chamber is designed to be humbling. The ceiling is transparent, and above it, unfiltered space fills the view with stars. The intention is to remind every delegate who sits beneath it that the things they argue about are small against the vastness of what exists. On the morning that Ambassador Kate Navarro first addressed the full council, she glanced at the ceiling for exactly 1 second, then looked back at the assembled delegates and began speaking. "Thank you for the time," she said. "I will be brief." Ambassador Navarro was the 3rd human to hold a seat at this council. The first had been there in an observer capacity only, when Earth had barely met the minimum requirements for coalition membership. The second had spent most of his tenure listening and taking notes, which was the standard advice given to new member species, and sound advice at that. Kate Navarro had listened to that advice carefully and concluded that it did not apply to the current situation. The current situation was that the Vreth had attacked a human installation without provocation in the Valos system, and the Council had so far spent 11 days debating whether to classify the attack as a territorial dispute or an act of aggression, because the distinction carried different procedural weight under the Coalition Charter. She placed a data pad on the table. "The Vreth killed 4 of my people at Forward Base Keller," she said. "They wounded 9 others. They destroyed or damaged approximately 60% of the base's infrastructure. They did this without warning, without declaration, and without any prior engagement on the part of the human personnel stationed there. Under Coalition Charter Article 44, subsection 3, this is an act of aggression. The Council has 11 days of transcripts discussing why it might be something else. I have read them, they are thorough, they are also wrong." The Quellan delegate, a tall, pale being named Seviorn, leaned forward. "Ambassador, the Vreth have presented a claim that the Valos system falls within their historically contested expansion zone, which complicates the classification under." "Seviorn," Kate said, not unkindly, "if I came to your home and hit you in the face, would you want 11 days of discussion about whether it was technically a punch or a push?" A beat of silence moved across the chamber. The Thurani delegate made a sound that the translation systems rendered as something between a laugh and a cough. Kate continued, "I am not here to demand military action. I am here to ask the Council to call the attack what it was in writing on record so that the Coalition's response, whatever form that takes, begins from an accurate premise. That is all." The vote took 40 minutes. It passed 6-3, with the Vreth bloc and 2 aligned species voting against. The attack on Forward Base Keller was formally classified as an act of aggression under Coalition Charter. It was a small thing, a piece of language on a document, but Kate understood that pieces of language on documents were where everything eventually started, and she walked out of that chamber with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had placed one important stone in the right location. Back on Earth, the news was received with the usual mixture of anger, relief, and immediate argument about what should happen next, because humans were very good at turning a moment of unity into a starting point for a new disagreement. Kate was used to this. She had been a diplomat for 16 years. She found it reassuring, in a strange way. A species that agreed on everything was either being controlled or not thinking hard enough. Her assistant, a 26-year-old from Indiana named Gary Pratt, who had the organizational skills of someone twice his age and the social confidence of someone half of it, met her at the shuttle dock with a prepared brief. 3 media requests, he said, 2 from Terran outlets, 1 from the Quellan Science Collective. The Science Collective one is interesting. They want an interview specifically about Terran military psychology. The Quellan Science Collective. Apparently, the liaison officer from Keller filed a report, Gary said. It is getting attention. Kate took the brief. She had not yet read Vec's report, but she had heard secondhand that it was detailed, careful, and deeply uncomfortable for a number of species that considered themselves the premier warrior civilizations of the galaxy. "Book the Science Collective interview for next week," she said, "and find out everything you can about what Vec actually wrote." "Already on it," Gary said. She nodded and moved toward the shuttle. Outside the viewport, the stars were quiet and indifferent the way they always were. Kate had learned not to find this discouraging. The stars did not care one way or the other. That was fine. She cared enough for all of them. Vec's report had a distribution list of 47 coalition scientists by the time it was 3 weeks old. By week 5, that number was 112. By week 8, it had been formally submitted to the Coalition Science Academy and flagged for review by 5 separate departments, which was essentially the scientific equivalent of everyone in a large building pointing at the same thing and saying, "You need to look at this." The report was titled, "Behavioral and Physiological Observations on Terran Combat Response," with specific reference to the defense of Forward Base Keller, Valo's system. It was 114 pages long. It included video analysis, biological notes, psychological observations, and a concluding section that Vec had agonized over for 3 days before deciding that the most honest version was also the most useful version, regardless of how uncomfortable it made people. The concluding section began. "It is the assessment of this observer that the Terran species represents a categorically distinct class of warrior civilization, not due to any superior physical capability. They are, in fact, physically unremarkable by galactic standards, but due to a combination of psychological, cultural, and evolutionary factors that produce a combat response unlike anything currently documented in coalition records." It went on from there. The part that got the most attention, the part that circulated most widely, the part that ended up being read aloud in 3 different language translations on Quellen's scientific broadcasts, was a passage midway through the report in which Vec described watching Ethan Cole engage a Vreth soldier in hand-to-hand combat. He had written, "The Terran did not appear to be operating under a threat assessment framework in any conventional sense. He did not evaluate the Vreth's superior size and alter his behavior accordingly. He did not hesitate. What I observed was not recklessness. There is a meaningful distinction, but rather an absolute refusal to allow the physical reality of the situation to determine his response to it. He decided what the outcome would be and then applied himself to that outcome with total commitment. The Vreth expected him to flinch. He did not. And I believe that expectation of flinching, that universal assumption that overwhelming physical presence produces a behavioral response in the opponent, is something the Terrans have apparently spent the majority of their evolutionary history learning not to have." The Quellen Science Collective contacted Vec within days of the report's wider circulation. Then the Thurani Cultural Institute. Then the Keth Biological Survey Division. Then quietly, and through 3 separate intermediaries, a communications request from a retired Vreth military analyst named Gethvar, who had spent 30 years studying comparative warrior cultures and who introduced himself, when the connection finally resolved with the words, "I read your report. I need you to understand something. We have known about humans for 40 years, and we have consistently underestimated them, and I would very much like to understand why." Vec had been on a quiet posting for most of his career. He had specifically requested quiet postings. He was a scientist and an observer, not a public figure, and the attention made him deeply uncomfortable in the way that attention always made Quellen researchers uncomfortable. But he answered every message. Because this was important. He was on his 18th written response when the connection request from Forward Base Keller came in. He accepted it immediately. Ethan's face appeared on screen. He looked rested. Behind him, the base was visibly under reconstruction, new sections rising where the fire damage had been worst. "Ambassador Navarro sent me your report," Ethan said. "She thought I should read it." Vec felt something that he identified after a moment as mild embarrassment. I hope I represented things accurately. You did, Ethan said. Better than accurately, actually. The part about the persistence hunting, I had never thought about that, but you are probably right. He paused. I also want to tell you something. The day of the attack. You told me the survival probability was 6%. Yes. And I told you that meant they were not expecting us to win. Yes. I meant that seriously, Ethan said. It was not bravado. When the odds are that bad, the other side stops accounting for the possibility of your resistance. They start making assumptions. They stop being careful. He looked at something off-screen for a moment, then back. 6% is not zero, and humans have been working with not zero for a very long time. Vec wrote that down. He wrote it down carefully, word for word, because he thought it might be the single most important thing he had heard in his career, and he had heard a lot of important things. Commander Cole, he said, would you be willing to submit to a more formal series of interviews for the research? Ethan smiled. It was a quiet, slightly tired smile. Sure, he said, though I think you should also talk to Dara. She is more interesting than I am. I intend to speak with everyone, Vec said. I have a great deal of questions. Take your time, Ethan said. We are not going anywhere. The summit was held on Nexus 1, 6 months after Forward Base Keller, in a secondary conference hall that was smaller than the main council chamber and had no transparent ceiling. Someone had made the deliberate choice to hold it somewhere that felt like a room rather than a monument, and Kate Navarro suspected that choice had been made by someone who understood that the conversation about to happen needed to feel real. 11 species were represented, not just coalition members. Observers had been invited from 3 non-member civilizations, including, in the most diplomatically complicated decision of the year, 2 Vreth analysts attending in a non-official capacity at the invitation of the retired strategist Geth Var, who had apparently developed enough independent standing to make that request land. Ethan Cole was not there. He was still at the rebuilt Keller base, which the coalition had quietly reinforced in the weeks following the attack. Dara Keats was not there either. Ray Dunning had taken a posting closer to home. Lena Marsh was in training for the expanded human fleet that Earth's government had approved following the Valos incident. Cole Hartley had been promoted. Kate sat at the table. Vec sat beside her as a scientific consultant, which was a designation he had accepted with visible reluctance and quiet pride. The session opened with presentations, biological data, combat analysis, historical records, evolutionary theory, each one methodical, each one building toward the same conclusion from a different direction, the way that good scientific arguments do. Then Gethvar spoke. He was old by Vreth standards. His plate armor had dulled from the deep blue-black of his active service years to a grayish tone. He moved carefully, and he had the particular economy of motion that belonged to beings who had been powerful their whole lives and had learned to carry that power lightly. I am going to tell you something, he said, that my own people are not going to enjoy hearing, and then I am going to explain why I think it matters. The room was quiet. The Vreth have been the preeminent military force in this region of the galaxy for 200 years, he said. We have won that position through superior organization, superior discipline, superior willingness to bear losses, and superior long-term strategic planning. Those things are real. They are not myths, but they have also made us assume something that turns out to be dangerous. He paused. We assumed that when we arrived in force, the question of whether to fight was already settled, that our presence answered it, that beings with functioning self-preservation instincts would recognize overwhelming force and make the rational choice. He looked around the room. We have fought every major species in this coalition or its predecessor. Some fought well, some fought longer than expected, but in the end they all reached the threshold, the point where the body said enough. The point where the nervous system said, the cost of continuing is greater than any possible benefit. We knew that threshold existed because it exists in us too. We just made certain that reaching ours required more than reaching theirs. He folded 2 of his 6 hands on the table. The humans do not have the same threshold, he said. Or if they do, it is somewhere we have not found yet. And I want to be clear, this is not a mystical statement. It is not admiration without analysis. It is an observation with very serious strategic implications, and those implications run in both directions, for them and for us. Kate said nothing. She had been a diplomat long enough to know that some moments were better met with stillness. The Vreth attack on forward base Keller was unauthorized by the High Command, Gethvar continued. Commander Krath exceeded his mandate. This is being dealt with internally, and I will not speak further on it here except to say that his debrief has been reviewed at the highest level, and what he reported from that engagement has caused significant internal discussion. He met Kate's eyes. Significant is perhaps too mild a word. It caused something closer to a reckoning. The Thurani observer, a compact, amber-colored being named Selithroman IV, leaned forward. With respect, Gethvar, what exactly did Krath report? Gethvar was quiet for a moment. Then he said, he reported that at no point during the engagement did he have the sense that the humans were trying to survive. He said it felt from his side as if they were trying to win. He said that sounds like a small distinction, and he understands if others think so, but after 42 years of combat experience, it is the clearest way he knows to describe what he saw. Survival-oriented defenders look for exits. Win-oriented defenders look for opportunities. The humans in his account were always looking for opportunities. The room absorbed this. Vex, sitting beside Kate, was writing. He always wrote. Kate had come to find it steadying. "What are you noting?" she asked quietly. "Everything," he said. She nodded. The session continued for another 4 hours. By the end of it, nothing had been formally resolved, no treaties had been signed, no ultimatums issued. But something had shifted in the room in the way that things shift when a group of intelligent beings all revise the same assumption at the same time. The understanding that the humans were a new category of thing, not just a new species among many, a different kind of presence entirely. After the session closed, as delegates were filing out, and conversations were forming in small clusters the way they always did, Kate found herself standing beside Gethvar near the door. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I know it was not easy." "No," he agreed, "but necessary." He regarded her with the direct, measuring look that she had come to understand was simply how Vreth made eye contact, not hostility, just attention. "You are very calm for someone whose people were attacked 6 months ago." "I was angry," she said. "I still am in certain moments, but anger is not the most useful tool in every situation." "What is the most useful tool?" She considered. "Patience," she said, "and accurate information." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Your scientist, Vec. His report is being read by people in my government who have not read a coalition document in 30 years. "I know," she said. "What do you want from this summit?" he asked. "Not the official position. What do you actually want?" Kate looked at the room around her. The delegates, the analysts, the observers. 11 species in one room, all of them revising assumptions. All of them trying to understand something that did not fit their existing models. "I want them to stop underestimating us," she said simply. "Not because we want to be feared, but because accurate understanding is the beginning of accurate relationship. And accurate relationship is the only thing that eventually gets to peace." Gethvar was quiet for a long time. Then he inclined his head, a gesture Kate had seen Vreth use with their own senior commanders. "I will tell you something honestly," he said. "I came here expecting diplomacy, careful words and careful silences." "Yes." "What I did not expect," he said, "was to leave believing you." He straightened. "That may be the most alarming thing about your species. You actually mean what you say." He left. Kate stood for a moment in the emptying room. Gary appeared at her elbow with the usual debrief folder and a sealed container of something hot. "How do you think it went?" he asked. She took the container. Outside the viewport, the stars were there the same way they always were, indifferent and vast and full of distances that still needed crossing. "Better than 6%, she said. Gary did not understand the reference. That was all right. Some things you had to be there for. She turned toward the door. There was more work. There was always more work. The humans had barely been in space for 2 centuries, barely had a seat at this table, barely introduced themselves to the 10,000 years of history that the other species carried with them everywhere they went. And yet, the Vreth had pulled back, the council had voted, the reports were circulating, 11 species had sat in a room and revised the same assumption together. Ethan Cole was at a rebuilt base on the edge of the Valos system, drinking something hot from a sealed container and planning what came next. Dara Keats was probably still calling her shots in that quiet, patient voice. And somewhere in the galaxy, every species that had ever told itself it understood what humans were was reading Vec's report and quietly, carefully, beginning to wonder if it needed to start over. The greatest warriors across the universe had fallen silent. Not because the humans had beaten them, not yet, not in any final, settled sense. But because silence is what happens when something enters the room that does not fit the story you have been telling yourself about how the world works. And the humans had walked in, without armor and without apology, and refused to be the thing that every other species in the galaxy had decided they were. They refused to be small. They refused to be finished. They refused to stay in the box that 4 billion years of other people's evolution had not built them for. They just kept going. That is what they did. They just kept going. And